light that was blinding.
I was scared to death. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know if it was going to hurt me.
It was like a thick beam that was scanning the whole WSA, like he was looking for something.
When it broke into three pieces, the whole thing just blew us away.
What told me this was alive is that when they moved,
And good afternoon from Philadelphia. Frank here with a special Thursday afternoon edition of UFO News Network Sunday. Joined as always by my co-host Chant Hannah. And Chant, we're back at it again after a very interesting show last night. And we've got another fantastic guest today. So why don't you come on in and tell us all about it.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here, Frank. How are you, by the way?
Ready to go.
Yeah, everything's going really well. We have a very special guest on today, Gary Heseltine. Gary was born in 1960 in Scunthorpe, Lincolnshire. He served in the Royal Air Force Police from 83 to 89 before spending almost 24-year career in British Transport Police from 89 to 2013. He was a detective constable for 19 years. In January 2002, while serving as a police officer, he launched an unofficial national database for police officers reporting UFO sightings in the UK, which can be found at prufospolicedatabase.co.uk. In 2010, he was presented with the PRG Disclosure Award in Washington, D.C. by Steve Bassett. In 2012, he was given the Exopolitics Great Britain Award. He is also one of the leading researchers in the Rendlesham Force incident, Britain's most famous UFO case. He's currently the lead researcher and co-writer of a major independent feature-length documentary called Capel Green that is currently in production in the UK and the US. Based on his police experience, Gary has examined the best evidence from around the world and concluded on a circumstantial evidence basis that some UFO sightings involve extraterrestrials who are interacting with planet Earth. As a result of this belief, he retired early from the police in 2013 to create and launch UFO Truth magazine. It is a 96-page bi-monthly e-zine created especially for those people who believe that some UFO incidents involve ETs. In April 2013, he spoke on behalf of police officers worldwide who had experienced UFO sightings at the citizens' hearing at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. The magazine holds 2 international conferences per year in London, Holmfirth, West Yorkshire, respectively. Welcome, Gary, to our show. It's so wonderful having you here with us today.
Thank you for having me as a guest.
Yes, it's the 35th issue of your wonderful magazine, UFO Truth. And I noticed in the introduction to it, you said it's the start of a new year. You're optimistic that there could be some important developments in the world of disclosure over the coming months. What did you mean by that?
Well, there is what I see a two-pronged attack on the disclosure issue at the moment. One that you'll be well familiar with in the United States, which is the AATIP, Tom DeLoyne, etc., Luis Elizondo, and obviously the Pentagon admissions from December 2017 are crucial. We should never forget those. I think at the same time, what emerged for me on a personal level was something of a surprise in early September of 2018 when I got an invitation via Don Schmidt, obviously from Roswell fame, invited me to go to Moscow to attend an inaugural kind of initial business meeting, for want of a better expression, with a Chinese delegation and some Russian delegation about a possible Chinese-funded initiative. And basically, I'd never been to Moscow. It's a place I always wanted to go, so I was keen to go, went, and it was fascinating to meet with the Chinese who were going to fund this initiative. And whilst it's still in its very early stages, although I am in the background heavily involved, I can say that the basic premise is to form an organization of world recognized UFO delegates, each from at least 30 countries. You need a minimum, it seems, of 30 national delegates so that you can go to the UN and UNESCO and be recognized as a world organization. And so we're in the process of gathering delegates from all around the world, recognized experts, one per country at this stage, to get that, to reach that limit and be recognized. That's an ongoing process. I think that will be achieved in the next 3 to 5 months. And then I think after that, you will begin to hear more about what we're trying to do publicly, because at the moment it's all very low key and we're just trying to organize ourselves first.
Now, the folks who were involved in this on the Russian and Chinese side, or at least the Chinese side, are they scientists? Are they government officials? Are they private individuals who are interested in the field? Who makes up that group?
Well, I can't say too much at this stage because it's still very much kind of not hush-hush, but because it's still in its formative process, they don't want to reveal too much, and I've got to stand by that. What I can say is that the idea comes from a Chinese researcher, UFO researcher, who I wasn't familiar with because I'm not that au fait with Chinese ufology, but some of my colleagues did know of him, and he's the one proposing it. And all I can say is at this stage, it's going to be funded solely by the Chinese. Now, you're going to ask me the obvious question, who is that funding from? And the answer is, I don't know for certain. So at this stage, I'm not going to say.
Got it. Now, one thing I have heard about Chinese UFO research, they do tend to take it pretty seriously over there, but you literally have to have a doctorate in order to be sort of, I guess, a registered UFO investigator. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I mean, in the past, there has been some conferences. I think there was a big international conference in 2005, and then it's a very academic subject in China. But that has not got in the way of what is proposed now. And I think that in order to get a recognized world body, as it were, not everybody has that kind of background. Mine's a police background. Other people who are scientists some scientists are some of the delegates, but it's a very broad mix, and I don't think we could deliver that in quite the academic terms. I think it is just getting recognized UFO experts, and I think they're very reliant to a degree on the European side of things, where there are so many countries like South America that they've the big input. AJ Javad, who I'm sure you're aware of, who runs the Brazilian UFO magazine, he's the delegate for Brazil, and also now a part of an executive council as the continental director. And so when you think of South America, when you think of Europe, there are a whole host of countries, and then it's a question of literally amongst our peer group nominating people who we believe will want to do the role and believe implicitly that some UFOs are ET. That is the basic criteria. To be a delegate, you have to sign an oath, an official oath, that says that you believe that some UFOs are ET, that the case is proven, and now it's really about moving on and preparing for a level of contact and protocols.
And what would the next step be? For me personally, my feeling is let's try to figure out how often it's ET. What would the next step be as far as you know from this organization, or what would your next step be if you ran the organization?
Well, one, I don't run the organization, so that would be improper for me to say, but I guess all of these things are going to be worked out at a next meeting, which is probably going to be around May, June time, because the headquarters is going to be in China, because they're funding it. It will be in China. I do not have details of that yet, but I think it would be prudent to wait until see what comes out of that. But the way I look at this is that anybody who is serious about wanting disclosure we should be included in a process until such a time as we don't believe in the process. It's better to be on the inside and find out what's going on and hope that it's a genuine initiative. And at this stage, I believe that entirely. And so let's go with the flow. Let's see how it is intended to work, what its real aims are going to be. And I think this is something that will come out in a few months' time.
Did you pick up any info on any specific cases that may have happened in China or Russia that we here in the West aren't familiar with?
No, but it was quite a high-level meeting. It was hosted in Moscow, and there were 2 cosmonauts there, both in uniform, both retired, but both in military uniform. So this was, you can see that it was quite a big publicity thing, and there was a big Chinese delegation there. So I think it's early days, but let's see where it goes. That's what I'm saying to people who we are approaching to be delegates.
So it looks like you might have a busy year ahead of you.
Yeah, and to be fair, I've always wanted to, in a sense, get into the political arena in terms of ufology. But up until now, I think it would be fair to say that historically, when you look at the UFO subject worldwide, we've not been very good at organising ourselves and putting our best foot forward collectively. It's been very ego-driven, and my group's better than your group, my personality is better than your personality, which has led to us not really having a political force, which you'd think after 70-odd years we should have had by now.
Gary, in your e-zine, UFO Truth, you said, while the UFO UAP enigma is complex, it is clear to you that there is a non-human presence interacting with the Earth, and it acts with clear signs of intelligence. Can you give us a few examples of what you mean by clear signs of intelligence?
Well, if you see a UFO at close quarters and you flash a flashlight towards it, it will come towards you. Has often been reported by police officers talking to me. Sometimes the object will come curious and then go away. When you look at pilot reports where there's real interaction, they turn off all the cabin lights and then the object puts all its lights on and things like that. If you think of the Iranian chase, jet pilot chase, when he got too close, the object fired, in all intents and purposes, a red object directly on a collision course with the plane, as if it was like throwing out chaff, and the pilot thought he was going to die. So, I mean, this is all very clear intelligence. What we're looking at is only a small percentage of cases reported worldwide, and I think perhaps I would agree with only the overall general term of 3%, 5% initially, and then when you core down and you look at the very best cases after investigation, then you end up with about 3%. But that's 3% of millions of cases over the years.
Mm-hmm. You said also in your e-zine, their origins may be interdimensional or multiverse, but at its heart, you believe that a proportion of sightings are definitely ET in origin. How do you feel about the topic of UFOs, or rather extraterrestrial crafts and extraterrestrials with regards to the topic of consciousness? Do you feel like those two topics connect at all?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, many years ago, it was a bit more, it was very much black and white. There were those that believed in the nuts and bolts, the Major Donald Keyhoes of the world. And then as time went on, when you look at Valet coming into the field, it got much more expanded. And I think that's where we are at the moment. And obviously, I think like with the God particle, the Higgs boson particle, now people say that, and I'm not a scientist, but they will say that there are now definite multiple universes that can all be coexistent at the same time. Time travel may be possible, interdimensional. I think all of that aspects are true now, and there are very many parallels now that we accept into the paranormal world. There are crossovers there, often creatures, Bigfoot, strange creatures are seen alongside UFO sightings. It's something that would have never been talked about 30, 40 years ago, but I think people are more open to that. But I think at the heart, if you are to accept that the abduction phenomena, or a percentage of the abduction phenomena, is real, and I definitely believe that, then you're looking at millions of people around the world, often describing what could probably be described as 4 or 5 main types of what looks like something that's ET, other than say the Nordics, and then you go into different areas. So I think that if you accept that there is an abduction phenomena, then part of the UFO enigma is ET related. It may well be many more things, but I personally believe that there's definitely an ET link. And if you think about what we're trying to do, reach out into space, and what we now know through astronomy of how many billions and billions of planets and stars, and with around every star now, they're saying there's literally anywhere between 6 and 10 satellites, moons, etc., planets. So every single star will have a planetary system, and of those in that planetary system, probably 2 or 3 are what's called in the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold, that can support life. All it takes is for, I often say this, the Star Trek argument is a great way to look at this. It's ridiculous for astronomers to say, oh, well, look at the light years. That's because you're thinking in earthly terms by our own level of knowledge. But if you were a civilization that had emerged technologically 10,000 years earlier than where we are now, then they wouldn't be driving around in petrol-driven cars and jet-engined jet aircraft. So they would have developed new methods of propulsion. But that's only 10,000. What if a civilization out there in space is 1 million years ahead? They may be able to go between the star system by whatever methods of propulsion, but undoubtedly they will have been found in the blink of an eye. And maybe consciousness plays a part in that, because a lot of people will say that the art of travel in the future may be through the mind.
Okay, well, it sounds like you and Stanton Friedman, who you've known since 2004 when you met him in Ireland, and has also been a contributor to your e-zine for the last 2 years, and you relate to what you just talked about. He actually said that he believes advanced extraterrestrial civilizations have the capability of telepathy, mind control, communication at a distance, and causing amnesia so people will not remember their abduction experiences. I wanted to bring up an interesting topic Bob Lazar has brought up repeatedly, and that is the ability for crafts, these extraterrestrial crafts, to traverse interstellar space. And he proposes the idea that element 115 that decays into element 116 allows these crafts to travel for long distances with nominal amounts, very small amounts of element 116. How do you feel about that? Is that possible? What do you think these crafts run on if it's not that?
Well, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to go into areas that I'm not secure on. Suffice to say that obviously I'm well aware of Bob Lazar, and it's a fascinating account. And the fact that he was talking about element 115 before it was officially acknowledged is interesting. However, in many ways, as I reviewed in the magazine in issue 34, I liked the documentary, and he's always good on screen, as is George Knapp. But in terms of evidence to prove categorically that he worked where he said he worked, that he had the qualifications that he said, I think that's still very light on the ground. As compelling as I find him, and I do find him compelling, and I kind of like his attitude when he's on screen of, well, I can only tell you how I see it. He's very matter of fact, and that is quite impressive for me, that he's never really changed his story from 89 onwards, and he is very confident in himself. But I know I've spoken with Stanton Friedman about it on several occasions. He will say that there's not enough evidence to prove who he says he is. But I personally find him quite compelling. But if you're asking me the documentary. I enjoyed it, but was there anything really new from '89? Not at all. But I do find him a compelling character, and I think George Knapp is always good on camera.
Back to I did have a question though, and that is, how do these crafts? Because what my question was is, Bob proposes that the propulsion system of these crafts run on some kind of source. The source he suggested was a decayed element 115, which turns into element 116. If it's not that, what kind of propulsion system do you feel these extraterrestrial craft, not all, but some, consists of?
Well, as I say, I'm not a scientist or a physicist, so what I would say is that they have harnessed anti-gravity in some way, and are anti-gravitic in their propulsion system, that way that they can move, they can do the right angle turns, that if it was a man-made machine, we couldn't do that. Instant acceleration, instant stop, reversals, instant reversal, instant stop, vertical ascent, vertical descent, all at high speed. We couldn't do that. The G-forces are way too much. So I think the ET travels by obviously some method of propulsion, and I suspect it's some form of anti-gravity. Now, what powers the anti-gravity, I don't know, but I just look at it in simple terms. Are there very good cases around the world that you can eliminate everything man-made, everything astronomical, etc.? And I think the answer is yes. And that 3% hardcore is a very definite given, that it's something not man-made. And if you think back to the Pentagon admissions, that's why it was on December the 16th, 2017, when Luis Elizondo said that there are exotic aircraft flying around in the US airspace that are beyond the technology of anything that the US possesses. Then that was one stop short of saying it was ET, and he basically has said it couldn't say it was ET because it then would become classified, and you then get into a kind of a political military quagmire. But that was a significant, in my mind, disclosure with a small d, because it was the first time, and obviously he had run a 5-year Pentagon program that nobody knew about, which again addressed many questions. If you think about it, the official US Air Force stance is that since the closure of Project Blue Book in '69, they've not researched UFOs. Now, any mainstream researcher of any decent knowledge will know that that's been a lie. But for them to admit that there was such a program that did not have Senate oversight, Congress oversight, was pretty interesting. And what it also emerged from that was even more interesting, and I think Luis Elizondo said it, I think Senator Harry Reid said it, if there's one program that was clandestine, how do you know that there are not many others that are still running? And I think the answer is there probably is, but they're in special access programs.
Now, you'd mentioned the To the Stars Academy, and there's also a case I know you know a little bit about, and we're going to get into more detail about that shortly. But there have been some reports that To the Stars Academy has received a on-the-ground sample from the Rendlesham site. Do you know anything about that? Have you heard about that, or do you know any details about that we're not aware of?
I don't know for certain what that alludes to. Suffice to say that Luis Elizondo, when he spoke in Rome a few months ago, and that was organised by a colleague of mine, Roberto Panotti, who was the Italian delegate and will be part of the Chinese initiative. He organised a conference, and Luis Elizondo came over and mentioned this, that within 4 months they would be revealing things about Rendlesham. I have yet to see any credence to that. Is it possible they've got some piece of recovered craft? Who knows? I'm not aware of it. But suffice to say that I think the Rendlesham case, with the release of Capel Green, will be enhanced a great deal by what we've emerged through my investigation.
Yeah, and let's get over and dig a little deeper on Capel Green. This is a documentary that's coming out later this year, this summer. You told me was a proposed release date, a scheduled release date, and Rendlesham is obviously one of the great cases, a top 10 case all time in my view. It's never had, to the best of my knowledge, a full-fledged documentary made about it. You're involved in it. Tell us all about it. How'd you get involved in it, and what can the folks look forward to as far as the movie goes?
Well, again, that has got a bit of a tale to it, because again, that came completely out of the blue. Literally, what happened? I'm just letting my two dogs in because they've been outside in the garden. Right, here we go. Right, basically, what happened was that I got a phone call from what turns out to be the director of the documentary, and he's called Dion Johnson, who I'd never heard of. And he basically had said that he had accidentally bumped into Larry Warren, the original military whistleblower of the case, whilst walking round Rendlesham Forest. Now, there is a trail now for the public, so there are signposts, etc. There is now a proper trail. It's not that accurate, but there is a trail that the council, the local authority, put out, and people go walk around it because it's nice woods. And he'd actually bumped into him and approached him and said, "Are you Larry Warren?" And Larry Warren, I think, was a bit reticent. But he had his daughter with him, and they got talking, and he said, "I know of your case. I don't know too much about it, but I know that you're involved in this Rendlesham incident." And then he basically said, "I'd like to make a documentary about what happened to you." And Larry said, "Okay," thinking probably nothing more would come from this. And he gave him my number, because he knows I'm a Rendlesham researcher in the UK. And so Dion rang me. Now, when Dion rings me, I'm thinking it's a proposal to get funding to make a TV documentary, because he said he'd worked in TV, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm thinking that he's ringing up to try to get funding, and he wants me to get on board to help with that. So I basically said, "Are you aware of the Larry Warren controversy at the moment?" And he said, "I know a bit about it." I said, "Well, I think you should know more about it." And I said, "To get your funding, what I would recommend is that you see if Larry Warren will do a polygraph test. And then, of course, if he passes that, you'll get your funding." And again, I'm still thinking this is going to be a TV project, and that's how you're going to get your funding, because if he passes the polygraph test that asserts that he was there and what he said is true, then that would give the financial backing to make the documentary. However, the story then went that he said, "Okay, then do you know any polygraph examiners?" And I said no, because it's not used in the UK by the police, although it does happen privately, and there is some talk about it coming into the police, but it isn't there yet. So I said, "I don't have any knowledge of a polygraph examiner in the UK, but see if you can go find one." He rings me up about 2 weeks later, and he says, "I've got Britain's top polygraph examiner to do it for free." And I said, "Oh, that's good. Why for free?" "Because it's something different out of a normal remit." And she's just fascinated by the chance to do something a little bit different. So her name is Patty Musicaro. She's an American, lives in England, married to an English guy, and lives near London. And basically, she's done over 2,000 polygraph tests in her career. She obviously has her own business. She's, I think, the secretary of the British Association of Polygraph Examiners. Forgive me for the wrong quote there, but basically that. And basically, he said, "It's arranged for this date. Do you want to come down and get involved? We're going to film it on remote cameras." And so I said, "Yeah, of course, fascinating." And so that's what happened. I went down to London, to her address, and 5 remote cameras were set up to record the actual test. When it came to the actual test, we were told to leave the house, and nobody bar the examiner and Larry Warren were there, and the cameras were just left running. And literally, it was about 35 minutes later, we get a phone call, "You can come back now, it's done." And I aren't going to go into too much detail. Suffice to say that he passed, and he passed with flying colours, and that will be covered in the film, obviously, because we had 5 cameras, and that's very revealing. And I think a lot of people will find that very, very interesting.
Now, you had mentioned that the controversy surrounding Larry Warren, and why don't you fill the folks in about that? Obviously, a lot of folks are out there questioning his credibility regarding the case. I don't think there's any question he was stationed there at one point in time. I talked to John Burroughs quite a bit. I consider John a friend of mine. He's been a good friend of the show. Back in the day, he said he wasn't sure if Larry was there at all, but now he's of the opinion that Larry simply wasn't there. It was remember the case is right before Christmas time, and Larry actually wasn't even at the base at Christmas time, that he was on leave. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the controversy surrounding Larry's credibility?
Well, what you've got to understand is that Larry Warren was the original military whistleblower who came forward to talk about the case. And I'm saying military whistleblower. There were civilian investigators, Brenda Butler and Dot Street, and then Jenny Randles, who researched it from the UK point of view early on, literally from within days.
Yeah, if you don't mind, let me jump in. I did get some background from John on this. The word about the incident actually got out very quickly because base security contacted the local police for their help in what was going on, and that showed up in the police logs, and the press picked it up very quickly. So the news of the actual incident got out very quickly. Is that about right?
Not really.
Okay.
In the sense of, yes, the police were contacted by the base, but those records were confirmed only many months later. I think the first newspaper clipping, Jenny Randles, was May of 1981. But within a couple of days, Brenda had been told by some security police person who I know who that is, who used the pseudonym of Steve Roberts. He basically told her that an incident in the field, in a farmer's field, had occurred, and there had been entities seen and a landed craft, and that senior officers had turned up, which is exactly what Larry Warren said a couple of years later. But the way Larry became the original military whistleblower is acknowledged by everyone. And what people try to say that he wasn't, but the reality is this, is that in 1982, Larry Warren read a newspaper report. He was living in the States at that time, and he read about the Betty Andreasson abduction story. And it turned out that they were living, Bob and Betty Luker, as they are now, she married Bob Luker, were living close to where he was living in the States at that time. And so he rang, and it said that he worked at some factory or some place. And so he rang the place and eventually got to speak with Bob Luker. And Bob Luker, and he kind of explained that something had happened to him while he was in England. And so Bob Luker invited him to go see Betty. And basically from that, he told them the same story that he tells now, the Capel Green scenario, the landed craft, the beings, the meeting with senior officers, and that it was filmed, etc. He basically told them about it, and they said, well, we know a Connecticut detective called Larry Fawcett, who was making a book called Clear Intent with Barry Greenwood. And up until that time, so we're talking 82 when he meets Bob and Betty, and it's early 83. Up until that time, there were rumors of military people being there. Nobody knew about the memo. Absolutely nobody knew that a memo had been written.
You're talking about the Halt memo now.
The Halt memo. That was really something that caught everybody by surprise. But the way it came out was inadvertently triggered because of Larry Fawcett speaking to Larry Warren. As soon as Larry Warren said, I'm prepared to go public with this, then he knew that he had a definite witness that he could then go to court. Obviously, the agency that managed to get the memo released, but nobody knew there was a memo. But on the strength of knowing that he had a definite witness who said, I was there on that time and here's my name, and was prepared to go public, on the strength of that, they knew that there should be some kind of documentation. And I think what happens is they do, because they'd written and written, trying to get everything, and the Americans had stalled, the British had stalled. No, we haven't got any documents whatsoever. But then after that then did another trawl of the military systems, and it turned up, had been retrieved by the Americans, had kept a copy, not the British, and they admitted that there was a memo, and that's how it came to be released. Larry Warren certainly didn't know that there was a memo being written. He was an airman first class. Why would he know? He was the lowest of the low. He was just arrived on the base. But suffice to say that inadvertently, through talking to Larry Fawcett, that's how the memo trawl, the investigation trawl of documents happened again, and it threw up the memorandum. And then, of course, the memorandum becomes one of the top 5 military documents in the world, I would say, on the RFI.
Gary, I had a question for you about the Capel Green story. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, in fact, I've just realized that to answer the second part of your point about the controversy, when Larry Warren came forward, essentially the story broke publicly in the news of the world in October of 1983. This was a story that was never meant to get out. And this was a story that should have never have got out if you listen to the Americans, listen to the British military and civilian in terms of government. Nobody wanted that to come out. Nobody even really outside of the base knew that had been written. That comes out. That then confirms that there'd been a serious incident. And Holt, in the memo, it's an incredible piece of paper because it's only 3 paragraphs. But admittedly, it says on the first paragraph that there's been a landed triangular craft in the forest, which is the first night Holt, Penniston and Burroughs and Cabanzac, which we all know about. And then it alludes that 2 nights later, there was another incident that involved Holt himself and a team going out and seeing multiple UFOs. So this was pretty amazing document. Now, the controversy is that Larry came out and immediately the UFO community of that era, when he started talking about a landed craft entities, that it was being filmed, he was being told when he would go to UFO conferences, well, you can't mention entities. You can't mention aliens. That's a bit too far for us. Well, nowadays, it's very common because we're well aware of the abduction phenomena, etc. But not in 1983 when he went public. And it was he wanted to talk about certain things, and then he was told by the organizers, you can't talk about that. So he would not know whether he was coming or going with the UFO community for a long while. But essentially, when this came out right from the off, as soon as Holt retired, he became offensive and said, basically, Larry Warren's just a charlatan. He was busted out. He did drugs, blah, blah, blah. Tried to paint him out as a dubious character. Over the time, it wasn't long after that, around the time of Penniston and Burroughs coming out, they immediately said, no, his story doesn't add up, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't sit well with the rest of us. Well, that's how it was for many, many years. But Larry Warren's book and story of the landed craft, the Capel Green scenario, is basically he's picked up from a perimeter post. He's told to get in the back of a truck, close his post down. They then go onto the base, look for light halls, which are big portable lighting generators to light up the forest. They go to the motor pool to collect those. They go into the forest. And then he is then told to go with others, small groups, through the forest, and then ends up at the edge of a farmer's field. It's the same as farmer's field that Holt follows the craft through. And it's the same farmer's field. There's the farmhouse on the opposite side, 300 meters away, but different location. Larry Warren will say when he got to the edge of the field, there was a mist on the ground about 50 feet off the ground, 50 feet in diameter that was maybe a foot, 30 centimeters, 12 inches off the ground. And it was like just hugging in a circle along the ground. There were security policemen personnel already out there. There was a guy filming it on the right-hand side of these personnel and the right-hand side of the mist. And then basically what he will say is that he is told to go into the field with Sergeant Adrian Bustinza, goes into the field, And then basically they're told to move closer to the mist. And then suddenly he hears over the radio, here it comes. And then he sees a red light coming in from the direction of the sea. It stops over the mist. It's about the size of a basketball, beach ball. It stops over the yellow mist. And then suddenly there's an explosion of light. When his eyes readjust, where the mist had been, there is now a 30-foot wide diamond-shaped morphing type of craft in front of him.
Okay, finish up, Gary. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, so basically the controversy comes from this account. And it's people have said in particular over the last 3 years, they've tried to write him out of it. But there's very good reasons why people would try to write him out of it if it were true. And what I'm saying to you is my research, which will be revealed in the film, will show this was indeed true. And there are many, many confirmations of the Capel Green scenario. And of course, one of the witnesses that will be featured in the documentary, as has already been revealed in one of the trailers, will say he was out in the forest and he'd been through training with him. So he recognized him in the forest that night, which is the same night as Holt. So that's done and dusted. We're going to put this to bed. But there's so much more to come out of this story. And what I would say to you is, are there good reasons why the Americans and the British would not want this story, if it were true, to come out? And the obvious answer is yes. Would the Americans and the British want the base commander of a nuclear strike base? We've got multiple confirmations on film that it's a nuclear base by military personnel that will be in the film. Multiple confirmations it's a nuclear base, that the base commander of a nuclear base turns up and approaches the craft where there is 3 small entities, whatever you want to call them, floating next to this translucent craft, and that there is some kind of silent communication or a face-off, for want of a better expression. It sounds like Star Trek. However, if that were true, think about it, the nuclear base commander meeting with entities in a field at a time of heightened Cold War tensions, do you not think that that would be a pretty major story if it were true?
So when you say the base commander, you mean Holt, is that correct?
Oh, no. I'm saying Colonel Williams.
Williams. Okay. I know who you mean. All right. Okay.
Let me say this. I believe Holt was there too.
Okay.
To talk about that in the documentary.
So this is a complicated case. So let's try to clear let's try to clear this up a little bit. You've got one sighting involving Burroughs, Peniston, and I believe 1 or 2 other individuals on the first sighting. Is that about right?
Essentially, the accepted story is that there's a sighting off about over the woods by the East Gate, about 300 meters away from the East Gate. People go out there, which is Cabanzac, Peniston and Burroughs. They go through the trees and eventually find a landed craft. Well, it's a landed triangular craft to Jim Peniston, but from John Burroughs' point of view, it's a bank of lights. He doesn't see it as a structured craft. John Burroughs and Ed Cabanzac will say that all 3 remained together all the time. Jim Peniston will say that Cabanzac was pushed further back to act as a radio relay. So you've got all these different things. But the accepted story over all the last 30-odd years of reporting by TV, and you say about documentaries, there's been about 50 to 60 documentaries done worldwide on Rendlesham. So there are many, many TV documentaries done. So there is a wealth of material, but none have ever really showed the true story. And there's reasons why that is. And we can talk about that later. But essentially, the first night is Peniston, Burroughs, Cabanzac. The second night, which nobody knew about for many years, we now refer to as Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin, who was the shift commander. Something happened to her that was so scary that she had to go off sick, taken off duty, and then was shipped back to the States. Never went back on shift. We'll talk about that in great detail in Capel Green. For the first time, the story emerges. And what we'll also be talking about is then the accepted, what's classed as the third night, which is the Holt night, going out with the team, And then also it's the crossover night that, if you believe the Larry Warren story, it's running more or less parallel at the same time, or certainly within parts of the same night.
Okay,
Yeah?
and you're saying that Base Commander Williams was also out there at the same time, or this was even a separate and apart sighting that he had, and he was involved with?
He was called out as if you are the base commander and you have some incident where you have multiple security police on British soil running around and they are reporting UFOs, which is what the case was, and undoubtedly it would have been fed back to the base commander. He turns up, it's believed he turns up with other senior officers, goes into the field and has this scenario. Now, we'll talk about...
But this sighting is separate and apart from the Halt sighting where he had, a team of... Okay.
You essentially think of Williams being involved in the Capel Green Larry Warren scenario. He's the only person, along with Adrian Bustinza, that will say that Colonel Williams was there. All right? Suffice to say that is not part of Halt's story. But what's going to emerge is that for the first time, we're going to reveal all of the facts, not just some of the facts. And when we move into the controversy, I think the real controversy stems from we cannot have this young upstart airman telling the truth about what really happened in that field, because if that happens, that could be a game changer and we'll get so much heat, and this could be a major game changer for the UFO field. Imagine, what I'm saying is, if the scenario was indeed true, that Colonel Williams, as then Colonel, went out, the base commander of a nuclear base, met with entities or had a face-off with entities in a field, surrounded, and was filmed on motion picture footage in cine and on early video, and Larry Warren's the only one that ever said that, and there are many confirmations of that now taking place that will be revealed in the film that I can't reveal now. That scenario, which I believe is absolutely true, that is why Larry Warren got so much grief, because people are covering up and do not want. They're happy to have Holt running around out there. They're happy to talk about Pennison and Burroughs. They can't contain that because the memo came out accidentally. That's out in the public domain. Okay, so they can't do anything. They can't.
So what you're suggesting here is there's something of a limited hangout regarding this case.
There is a cover-up. I'm not suggesting a hangout. I'm saying there is an automatic cover-up goes in. And if you're a whistleblower, it generally doesn't end well for you. If you think of Snowden, people like that, Julian Assange, whistleblowers pay a heavy price. And I think Larry Warren has paid a very heavy price. Now, to compound that is that 2.5, 3 years ago, his number one supporter, who was an online lady, she was his number one fan for 9 years, rang radio shows saying, get him on, he's the best thing about Rendlesham, get him on. She really hounded people in a positive way, get him on, he's the best thing about Rendlesham. Suddenly she goes 180 degrees the other way to become somebody who wants to destroy Larry Warren. Don't really know why, but that's what's happened. And she then begins to lead a number of other people in the UK to try to say he's not there, he's lying, this, that, and the other. He's lied about even waking up in the morning. Basically, just so obsessed, putting material out. So over the last 2.5 to 3 years, there is a huge body by about 50 individuals, mainly about 4 or 5, hardcore of about 20, of a group of about 50 in the UK that are bombarding radio stations saying he's a liar, this has been proved. Now, when I got involved a couple of years ago, accidentally through being asked to do Capel Green, I looked at their evidence, and literally I'd been a detective for 19 years. I knew what police evidence was. A police officer for 24 years, a detective. I was an advanced interviewer of suspects and witnesses. I was well used to looking at evidence in documentary form, written evidence. And when I looked at all of the evidence, it didn't stack up. But it was persuasive for people who didn't know the law. Yeah, I could understand how some people would be taken in. And I actually think that Peter Robbins was taken in. And he thought that, Larry Warren is going down, so I'm going to jump ship. And sadly, he jumped ship. But
Well, what was it about the evidence that was presented that you had a problem with? And let's talk about that evidence. There were some photoshopping of Warren into photographs with John Lennon. There was some other material. Why don't you talk about that a little bit and what raised the red flags for you?
Well, what do you mean by red flags? I don't have a red flag. Do I think Larry Warren was involved in Rendlesham? Absolutely 100%. Do you?
I'm not sure. That's why I'm asking you.
Well, let me tell you, when I've looked at the evidence that was presented by this so-called group, it didn't add up. For example, one guy who was part of that group of 4, he contacted me and said he's manipulated some of his military records. Bear in mind, he did not have any original records to check with. He just took photo grabs off the computer, basically screen grabs. And from that, he had said, no, he's changed the signatures, blah, blah, blah. So when he showed me this, before looking into it, I said, are you a police accredited handwriting expert? And he went, no. I said, well, that means that your evidence does not count as evidence at all. I cannot give medical opinion about somebody for a brain injury unless I'm a brain neurosurgeon. You have to be an expert in your field. And it's the same in the police. So anybody who claims to have handwriting expert, if you've just done it because it's a bit of a hobby of yours, unless you're an accredited police handwriting expert, that is not evidence. It doesn't stack up. Yeah. And basically, it was never done against original documents. During the course of my investigation, I've checked Larry Warren's documents, and many of them are in double and triplicate, which obviously all he had was a screen grab. And believe me, they're all genuine. So that doesn't add up. So that's the kind of story that you get. Now, the problem that comes with these people, and it is a definite campaign, and if anybody is interested to know about how this group works, then I did a PDF investigation document called Winter is Here. And if they email me at heseltinegary@hotmail.com, I will gladly send it to them. And it's their own words, screen grabs by them, put out on public Facebook comments. It's their own words, and you'll see what these people are like. But the problem is anybody that disagrees with their so-called evidence then becomes targeted. So as soon as I said, well, your evidence doesn't stack up, since then, they F and blind about me, swear about me, I'm a liar, a con man, a fraud. Do you think that's acceptable, Frank? Chant?
I wouldn't accept it if it weren't. I wouldn't accept it even if it were true, but if it weren't, I certainly wouldn't accept it.
So I'm given verbal abuse. The magazine is derogatory. Comments, you're this, that, and the other. Do you think that's acceptable?
No. Even if you disagree about something, you shouldn't be disagreeable about it.
So in reality, Frank and Chant, what you're saying is that we have normal civility. We can have disagreements, especially over politics, religion, etc., but we'll agree to disagree. Well, here's the difference with this group of people. If you disagree with them, you then become the enemy, and then you become targeted for personal abuse. And this is what I keep kicking off about, because it's unacceptable in any subject, in any walk of life. You cannot go around calling people an effing this and effing that just because you disagree with their opinion. You have to be civilized and agree to disagree. And this is a massive problem for social media. People are committing suicide. Teenagers have been bombarded with images from Instagram, things like that. And so people commit suicide. So social media needs to get its act together, and there needs to be a reform. Because if you have to use personal abuse, which is what I've got for the last 2.5 years from these people, just for standing up and saying, I disagree with you, then it is wrong, and people should count them out and call them out for that and say that's unacceptable. Here's the problem, Frank and Chant, that the UFO community does not call them out. Why? Because they're so frightened that they might get the torrent of abuse themselves. So what does that tell you about some of the people in our hierarchy of ufology? Many of them are weak, and they will not, who could make a difference and say this is unacceptable. If you've gotten a point, you put it out there, fine. You can have a disagreement. I'm happy for skepticism and this, that, and the other, but you do it in a civil way. And you should not target people with abuse because you don't agree. Well, this is how that group operates. So if you want to mix with those people, then that's fine. And believe me, the people that now mix with them regularly, sadly, are Peter Robbins, who joins in on that abuse, not through direct personal abuse, but joins in on their strings, and is quite happily when they're targeting me to go along and call them friends. Nick Pope, who I was always affable with, known him for many years, had dinner with him, sat across him one-to-one, had dinner with him. He is now saying I should be arrested for perpetrating a hoax on the UFO community. Well, why would I do that, Frank? Why would I do that? Why would I risk my reputation, something that I tried to develop since 2002 with the police database? Why would I do that unless I had absolute conviction that the evidence that I'd accumulated was genuine? So why would he use it? And he has used recently personal abuse against me for the first time. So not only is he saying I should be arrested, but he's now using personal abuse. And I say that is unacceptable, Frank. And that should be unacceptable for everybody in ufology. But the real motive is why. The real question is why. Why?
Well, that is odd for Nick, because he does have like him or not, or think he brings good material or not, he's got a long track record of being a civil guy. And,
well, he's not now. And I can show you the documentary evidence that proves that. If you wish me to do that, I can send you the links and you can put that up on your links after the show. I'm quite happy I've got the evidence, can prove that. But the point is, these people are all heavily involved with the team of trolls. And that's
let me turn around the other way. You said why would you do this? Why you're saying that you're basically accusing Nick of being part of a cover-up, and that's why he's engaging in this abuse. Is that about right, or am I wrong on that?
Well, I think the obvious answer to that is indirectly yes. Why would he go from somebody that had always been affable with me to now saying I should be arrested?
Affable with everybody, not just you. I mean, I think he's pretty well known for that.
But why would he do that? Why would he become abusive now? And it doesn't make sense. Like you say, he's a very soft-spoken guy normally, and that's the Nick I knew until about 18 months ago, when he then started regularly mixing on online discussions with these trolls. So he's associated. And what's sadly behind this even more is that they report back to Colonel Holt. The trolls are direct linked to Colonel Holt, who doesn't get involved himself. He oversees it, but he is good friends with all of these people who are dishing out abuse to myself, to anyone who has me on a show, something like that. They ring up the radio show. You can't have him on there. He's a liar, a con man, and a fraud. I mean, is that normal behavior? And the answer is no. But the question is, this is the way they operate, and it's wrong. And unfortunately, the UFO community have been allowed them to do this in such a way that many people have privately told me, who run magazines, oh yeah, we agree with you, Gary, but we don't want to face the abuse ourselves. Well, I can only speak for myself and think that I'm disappointed that if they'd have acted strongly very early on, 2 years ago, none of this abuse that has been going on daily for 2 years towards me, towards Larry for 3 years, 4 years, it should have been ruled out straight from the off if the people who were in place, magazine organisers, radio show hosts, etc., had said, no, that's unacceptable behaviour. If you've got a point, raise it, but let's not behave like that. And that should have been the response from the UFO community. So the so-called evidence doesn't stack up, to answer your question, and that will all be revealed in the film. And honestly, I'm not going to put my name to this unless I felt that it was absolutely genuine. And the evidence that I will produce as the co-writer and researcher will show that it's very real, and that Larry Warren has paid a very high price for telling the truth.
Now, there are other witnesses from Rendlesham in the moment that are involved in this film. I saw a couple of gentlemen, and I recognized Laurie Reffelt. So can you can you ID the other two gentlemen who you interviewed who were witnesses, and can you tell us a little bit about Laurie's involvement?
Well, Laurie has a very good case herself from February of 1980, so some 10 months before the late December sightings. And she has been talking about this openly on social media for a long time. But essentially, she's been shunned by the principal people that you can talk about, who were well associated with the case, it didn't take place in December, therefore it's not part of anything. However, in making Capel Green, we realized, or we came across what I would call three precursor cases that are actually, I think, telling a story about the UFO involvement that leads up to the December sighting. So we cover Laurie's sighting in a reenactment, which has never been done before in 4K.
And this is also at Rendlesham, though, even though it did happen earlier.
Oh, yeah, they're all Rendlesham-related events, but they just predate what we accept as the RFI, which is late December of 1980. So you've got Laurie's in February, and then we've got an incident with Michael Stacey Smith, who was in one of the trailers. You'll see him with a big M60 machine gun. And he had an incident on base. This is on base, close to the weapons storage area. He had an incident which will be revealed in full, but you've seen a snip that he's involved, and that's in the summer. And then there is a November sighting, which is being reenacted, and we're not releasing his details yet, but there is another sighting with somebody. And then what one of the trailers shows is Steve Longero, who went through training with Larry Warren, coming forward, saying that he'd seen beams from a UFO scanning into the weapons storage area, and significantly, he was inside as a security policeman inside the nuclear weapons storage area when this is taking place. So that is dynamite, and as nobody's ever said to a name, nobody's ever put their name to it, has been inside, seeing the UFO shining in. So that's going to emerge the full details, and that is an amazing story that has got many other aspects to it that will be revealed in Capel Green.
I just wanted to break in and ask a question that might be a little different. Moving along, Jim Peniston, who is a contributor to your e-zine, you said in the latest issue of your publication that Jim Peniston, regarding his alleged binary code download when touching a landed craft on the first night of the now famous Rendlesham Force incident, you gave a little bit of information regarding that in an article you wrote. Can you just share something about that? Because I found that article fascinating. I didn't want to give too much away. I was hoping you would share, a little blurb with us about us on that topic.
No, I'm fine to talk about that, but I think you need to say and clarify that it wasn't Jim Peniston who I'd been speaking to, so he did not.
It was Gary Osborne, yeah.
Gary Osborne, who is working with Jim Peniston. Gary Osborne is the guy looking at the binary code and its implications whatsoever. Now, up until this point, I had never had any communication with Gary Osborne. I knew of him, and I knew that there was a book coming out. So when I saw him on a Facebook page, and I sent him a message. I said, "Are you talking about the binary code? When's your book coming out? Blah, blah, blah." And that then led to what turned out to be a very lengthy discussion about the binary codes. And it was such a good discussion that I thought it should be in the magazine, because I don't really know about the binary codes, only what I've been told, only what I've seen in documentaries. And so I thought this would be interesting for my readers. Now, it's out there, and basically it's going into the fact, and he produces many pages of the binary. There's 16 pages in total. But the binary story is controversial from my point of view, because other than Jim Peniston, there is no corroborative evidence whatsoever to say that he had a download. And I think that's which is what fascinated me to speak with Gary. And what I said during the course of the discussion that's in the article in the magazine is that basically I would recommend, because it's a standalone story, no corroboration, that at the very least, Jim Peniston submits to a polygraph examination. Because if he passes that, then that again is as much as he can do, saying that from his point of view, it's a real event, and that would help corroborate that it was a real event, that it was not made up, etc. So I recommended that he do that, and also suggested, as I think Jim has already suggested previously, that the paper and ink should be given over to independent UFO researchers to check the age of the ink and the age of the paper. Now he mentions, I think, that it has been the pocketbook, which nobody knew about the pocketbook for many years, and it only turned up in the documentary until the mid 2000s. So he never mentioned it, and then suddenly it's there. So again, you need to check and verify the age of the ink. Now that may well be covered in the book that's coming out. I don't know what's in the book, but it was an interesting discussion. I'd never had any kind of communication with Gary Osborne before, but I think a lot of people will be fascinated to hear about the binary codes. I personally am very suspicious of them, and I've openly said that, because they're a standalone account and without any kind of operation. Whereas if people try to say that Larry Warren wasn't in the field that night, well, you best tell that to Steve Longero, who saw him out there and arrived at the base with him and did the training with him. I think he would recognize him if he saw him in the forest, and he did. So that kind of ends that one. But Adrian Bustenza put Larry Warren there on many occasions. So we'll talk about the level of corroboration other people have put in there as well. So there is corroboration for Larry Warren being there. Unfortunately, Jim's story is uncorroborated. That's the problem.
I'm sorry to interject. I had kind of a different question, and that is regarding the authenticity of something, since we're talking about that idea. Jim Penniston brought up something interesting not that long ago. I did a post regarding AATIP videos, and regarding one of them, Jim said the film clip is doctored, and he said that he felt the object on the nose cam had been masked. And in other words, he feels like the AATIP videos, one of them at least, is either a hoax or a disinformation attempt. Now, it's not so much that it's Jim Penniston saying that, but it's a good example of somebody who has a high profile in the UFO community, who is pointing out that one of these videos that people really rely on for information from the government regarding a UAP interaction with the military could be a hoax. Do you feel the AATIP videos, one or all, are hoaxed?
Well, I certainly, I don't have it. I'm not aware that he said that, but my reaction to that would be, well, I think there is clear evidence to say that the 3 that have been released were put through the Pentagon release system, so do appear to be official. Certainly, the best case of the videos that's come out is the one involving the USS Nimitz and Commander David Fravor, the pilot, who has done multiple interviews and now is even turning up at UFO conferences. And I think that the Nimitz special effects video that Mr. Beatty put out recently was superb. The special effects video that was put out there really brought that Nimitz incident into focus about the Tic Tac. So I have no doubt that the Tic Tac incident is real, and that is a major case because of the caliber of the people involved. I've not heard that the other videos are hoaxes, and you would hope that they are not, because that would undermine the credibility of Luis Elizondo and all the other people at the To the Stars Academy, etc. So let's hope not.
Yeah, just for your information, we've had Dave on the show 3 times actually, and he does feel that he has nailed down that the 2 videos that you're talking about were actually from the same incident on the East Coast of the U.S. in 2015. So he feels he's got that nailed down. Excuse me, but he's still not 100% sure if the audio that is included is legitimate. So that's where he's at on that, and he's looked at it probably as close as anyone. Just so you know.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, all I can say is that the special effects that he's the animation that he put together to bring the Tic Tac incident to life was amazing, and I fail to see how anybody could not be impressed by that if they watch it.
And also an additional step that he did, he actually got Kevin Day, who was the radar operator on the Princeton that was part of that naval group, to help out with the voiceovers and help a little bit with the dialogue to add a little bit of additional authenticity. It was fantastic.
Absolutely superb. And full credit. And we need people with those skills to bring these incidents to life. And that's, in a sense, actually moves back to Capel Green, because for the very first time, based on actual witness descriptions, we are using top special effects to bring these incidents to life in a way that they've never been done in documentaries before. And I think when you see the many, many different types of objects that were seen, and there were quite a lot of commonalities. The red kind of small glowing beach ball size object crops up several times throughout the documentary from different military witnesses. When you see them brought to light, how anybody can still talk about it's a lighthouse, you'll see how ludicrous that always was. But one of my main aims is to challenge the way the mainstream media have portrayed the Rendlesham case, because there is a lot more information, old and new, that has never ever featured in documentaries, because it's TV driven, money driven, TV UFO bias driven, and they only tell part of the story. They don't give people the facts. So what I promise people, and I'll say it again on air, I've done it on every show, is I'll make a pledge that you'll get more information about Rendlesham than has ever been put out in any documentary ever. And there is a lot of new information and a lot of important old information that I'm not going to go into now that is relevant, that should have been put out there by the mainstream, and they haven't done it. So that begs the question, why are investigative journalists not showing best evidence? And I think anybody who knows the subject closely and followed it over many years will say that there is a cover-up involved in the mainstream media, and I absolutely buy into that. It is a cover-up, and you have not been told everything that you should have been told about Rendlesham.
Gary, To the Stars Academy, the public benefit corporation run by Tom DeLonge, as you know, they have announced their flagship research project known as AATIP, which stands for Acquisition and Data Analysis of Materials, to collect and evaluate material samples from crashed UFOs. The metamaterials that they are collecting, allegedly, is being headed up by Dr. Hal Puthoff, whom you know very well regarding, who he is and his history. And I wanted to know, do you feel like this year or in the coming months or anytime soon, TTSA or any organization, including the government or any first world government or any other government around the world, will come up with anything with regards to UAP fragments or exotic alloys of any kind?
I think that what we can do now is that Bigelow has effectively collected a lot of material from all over the world, I believe.
I believe that too.
Yes. And the question is, when is he going to really up the ante and release the analysis reports to the world? If he has lots of material, and they have got some incredible analysis reports that say these things are concoctions that are not made on Earth, they're put together in a way that we can't replicate on Earth, then my personal opinion is that we should be moving to a stage where there is a big announcement. He's a billionaire. He can surely get a lot of publicity if he wants to push this forward. I do sense that something is happening on the disclosure front. And it's amazing how Luis Elizondo just came out from the woodwork, and we suddenly find that there'd been this 5-year secret program. I suspect there are many other special access programs. Dr. Puthoff did an incredible address a few months ago, summertime last year, and the things he's talking about, this, which we featured in the magazine, was like reading science fiction, but it's all stuff that he'd worked on. So I think for somebody of his stature to be going in public and making these kind of comments says that we are moving towards a time where we're probably getting towards a real disclosure sooner rather than later. And what I mean by that is within 5 years.
Okay, well, there's all kinds of scientific applications regarding metamaterials. One of them is cloaking. Do you feel like any government around the world has access to that kind of technology, if not cloaking, any other kind with regards to metamaterial discoveries?
I think the real answer to that is the UFO field that we know about. I would estimate we only know 10% in the public domain worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
So that means in the secret world of governments and intelligence services and intelligence research, there is 90% we don't know. And I suspect we do have man-made, recovered, retrieved UFOs, for want of a better expression. We may have harnessed anti-gravity, we may have a space fleet, but as yet, we don't have the accumulative evidence to prove it in the public domain. I think a lot of people who've researched this subject for a long time will think and suspect that there is a secret space program, but we've just not been told it. To what level, who knows? But do we think that there is other things going on and that maybe NASA is just a front for other research going on in the moon, Mars, etc.? Who knows? But I think a lot of people suspect that there are programs. In the secret domain, I have no doubt that we have probably harnessed maybe anti-gravity and we have made some reproduction models, but however, not on the scale of people say the TR-3B. Everybody mentions a triangular UFO sighting and go, oh, TR-3B. Well, we may have a TR-3B, I don't know, but I don't think there are many, and you certainly not have them hovering low over cities like many police officers have reported to me, even in the UK. Objects the size of a football field. In one case, 2 officers told me an object the size of 3 football fields, black triangle, silent, just over some trees. And I said, how do you know it was the size of 3 football fields? And he says, because when we saw it, it was over 3 sports fields. So that's pretty good estimate, so size description. So if these things are around, I think most of ET, I think they have the ability to cloak and uncloak, for want of a better phrase, at will. They have harnessed technology far beyond ours. I think in terms of space, we're a bit like the ant in the playground. We think that we're pretty clever, but in reality, we're at a very early stage of our cosmic awareness, and we're the ant in the playground. And do we talk to ants? No, we don't, because we think we're far superior to an ant. What if they think the same? And so
Gary, thank you for answering that. A different question. That is... Okay, it's a little complicated. I'll go ahead and start off by saying this. Stanton Friedman, a friend of yours and retired nuclear physicist, iconic individual in the ufology community. He's researched the MJ-12 documents. He's an expert on them. He's studied them for decades now. And he first became aware of them from William Moore and Jamie Shandera in 1984. He's concluded that a few of the MJ-12 documents are probably authentic. Recently, Michael W. Hall, the attorney for Grant Cameron, revealed on a show for the first time, and it just so happened that Frank and I were on that show, that Grant Cameron had come into possession of documents that were not classified at all, and he believes that they are authentic MJ-12 documents. Do you believe in MJ-12 documentation?
I have not done the research that Stanton has, but I've spoken at length with Stanton about this, and we are good friends. And we've met many times over the years and became good friends. And I really, really admire the man. He's a legend. He's done the research, and he told me that he believed that 4 of the documents were authentic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Christ, why am I going to criticize or go against what Stanton Friedman said? He's an archivist. He knows his documents well, and probably better than any man in the world in ufology. And if he said that 4 are genuine, then I believe Stanton's right. Do I believe generally that there is an MJ-12 or that kind of structure? Absolutely. And if I think that Roswell was real as an ET recovered craft, which I do, then I think that 1947, the creation of certain agencies that was done very quickly in light of the recovery of what went on there, then I think it all makes sense that there would be a secret group. And so inevitably there would be some documentation. So whether it was called Majestic, who knows, but there would probably almost certainly, if that scenario did occur, I think certain organizations and a very clandestine group, a secret group, would have been created to try to control what was then an incredible discovery at a time just after the Second World War. And I would say this as well, that at the time, I think they had every right to keep it secret. My argument would be that once the Soviet Union collapsed, the end of that era, then they should have released all and gone public with what they really know about ET.
I did have another question. Do you feel society, and if you don't mind, I normally don't ask people to do this, but if you could keep your answer brief, because I have another question for you right after this one, and that is, do you feel, Gary, society's evolved to the point where it feels there's extraterrestrial activity and they're more willing to acknowledge the possibility of it?
Yes.
Okay. That's fantastic. Thank you. Okay, the other question I have for you is, how long have you felt there could be the presence or possibility of extraterrestrial civilizations? And what was the defining moment in your life that convinced you extraterrestrial civilizations exist? So how long have you felt there could be the presence of ET civilizations? And what was the defining moment in your life that allowed you to believe that?
I had a sighting when I was 16 of an object that appeared to trigger a number of power grid failures in the area where I lived. I moved a mile approximately from one position to a second position, following a light in the sky, just a bright white light, nothing spaceship or anything like that. But then when I reached my home, having moved a mile, the object passed over the rooftop of my house. I was in the bottom of the garden. I looked back at my house, put my arm up as if I'm answering a question in a schoolroom, answering a question. And as soon as the object went beyond the 90 degrees of my arm, i.e. so effectively I was then behind the object's flight path, the whole area was plunged into darkness. And at that point there, I said to myself, having moved to a second geographical position, how could I have predicted a power cut? That object, whatever it was, must have interacted with the power grid. And that's where my interest stemmed from. But I didn't get involved into active research until I was 42, when I went public with the launch of the police database. But I think the evidence is cumulative worldwide. If you look at the best evidence especially from pilots, who are my favorite cases, military pilots like Commander David Fravor, why are these people going to lie? Why are they going to go public? And then we now have the ability through animation and computer graphics to bring these cases to life right from the 40s. So when I delved into the history and saw that pilots were chasing UFOs right through the Second World War, and in fact there's two incidents that are not really well known, that we talk about Foo Fighters during the Second World War as balls of light, but they weren't only just balls of light. There are two sightings that the British had, the crew of two crews of a Lancaster bomber, which was a 4-engine bomber, a big bomber of the Second World War. Two crews in 1944 and 1942 saw huge metallic, circular, disc-shaped objects flying alongside their aircraft that were that dwarfed their planes, so like 4 or 5 times the size of what was a large bomber of the Second World War. So there were structured objects flying throughout the Second World War that have been seen and documented, and we have those records in the British archives. So I think really from the 40s onwards, I think as soon as we we detonate an atomic weapon, that sends a shockwave out into space that says to people out there that this species on planet Earth has reached a level of attainment that they can create fusion and detonate a nuclear weapon. Now, I also personally believe and suspect that in our deepest ocean trenches, we probably do have UFO bases, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that's the case, because UFOs historically have been seen worldwide coming in and out of water, and in fact many military encounters that are recorded of objects seen near ships, military ships, diving in or coming out of the water, multiple objects. That says to me, in our deepest oceans, we only know 5% of the oceans. We know more about the surface of Mars and the moon than we do about our own ocean depths. So I think it's entirely possible that it's their habitat too. So I think there's a big correlation between UFOs and nuclear weapons. That's been well established since the detonation of the first atomic bomb. And if you think of Roswell, the first atomic bomb squadron, of all the places in all the bars in all the world, that's where they turn up. So it's no coincidence. People don't see that connection, but it's so obvious. They turn up over Roswell because it's an atomic bomb squadron, the first in the world. That's where they turn up. They've turned up over nuclear power plants and nuclear missile storage areas. They've shut down weapons storage areas, as has been reported by the likes of Robert Salas, etc. They can shut down. Their technology is far superior. And I think the message is that maybe it's their habitat too, i.e. if you live, some of them in a deepest ocean trench on a base, then they do not want to see their habitat destroyed through mankind's ignorance and stupidity.
Frank, do I have time to ask one or two more questions?
Yeah. I do have to get rolling, but yeah, one or two,
Okay.
that'll work.
Okay, Gary, do you see a major change in the way the media and scientific community treats the subject we've been talking about, ufology, or do you believe the scientific and journalistic communities are purposely ignoring the possibility of the presence of ETs or ET civilizations, however you want to frame that question?
I think there is a slight change to the positive following the release of the Pentagon admissions and Luis Elizondo and the video. The Nimitz incident is attracting a lot of attention,
Yes.
and especially now it's backed up with the superb graphics by Mr. Beatty. Then it's bringing it to life in a way, and people. If anybody in the media says to ufologists, well, where's your evidence? You point them back to December the 16th, and there's a clear admission by a guy who run a Pentagon program that says exotic aircraft are flying around in our airspace that's way beyond the technology of anything that America has. By process of elimination, that means it's ET.
Fantastic. And any parting thoughts on the topic of ufology in general, something you have not covered on the show? Do you have anything else you'd like to cover regarding the topic of ufology?
No, not really. I think it's I think there are signs that if the Chinese initiative, which I'm personally involved in, so obviously got a big interest, if that goes anywhere, which I hope it does, and we can get 30 representatives, 30 countries, get recognised, then have a platform which will be discussed and no doubt be broadcast in due course when it's the right time to come forward. If we can organise ourselves on a worldwide basis, then I think that would be a major step forward to creating a political element to put pressure on various governments to release what they really know. So I think hand in hand with what's emerging through AATIP, that it's all good if you want disclosure. I think we are moving towards it, and that I think the mainstream media should not ever be allowed to forget what Luis Elizondo said on December the 16th, 2017. And everybody has a duty to push them back to that, because they cannot get away with it ever again. We know that these things are out there. They're way beyond anything that America has. And that was an incredible admission. And so I think that the mainstream media are beginning to realize that. And I think, and actually, in a strange kind of way, the success of the Project Blue Book TV series, which is very much 98% fiction, 2% based on a bit of truth, but nevertheless, it's become a hit TV series, and it's well made. It's entertaining if you treat it as fiction, but nevertheless, all the shows effectively are about a cover-up by a secretive group. If that captures the imagination of the world through media, then I think that's a good thing, and we just then point them towards the Pentagon admissions and other things and our best cases from around the world, and I think we're edging towards a disclosure of types.
That's wonderful. I would like to point out something to our listeners, and that is a wonderful offer that Gary has given to people who are listening to our show today. If they actually write to Gary at Heseltine, Gary at hotmail.com. Gary, you'll have to correct me on your last name, by the way. But Heseltine Gary at hotmail.com, and I'll go ahead and spell that in a moment. They can get a free magazine, e-zine from Gary, UFO Truth, one of many They just have to choose which one, and he'll give more details on that right now.
Yeah, basically it's Heseltine Gary. You forgot what I said earlier, Heseltine Gary at hotmail.com. If they email me, they can choose one complimentary issue from one of 35 issues that we've had today. It's bi-monthly, and if you like it, then I'll put in a link, but it's entirely up to you. All you have to do is email me and say, I will listen to the Chant Hannah show, and basically I will send them whatever number that they request.
Right, and actually, if they just say that they listen to UFON, the UFO News Network, or they could just say the UFO News Network, that would be fantastic.
Yep, whatever. That all as they have to do is acknowledge this show that we've made today, and I will send them a complimentary copy of whichever number they wish.
We appreciate your time today, Gary. Thank you so very much. It was a real privilege to have you on the show.
No, you're welcome. And what you've got to understand is, because I know what's going to be in the documentary, the director will kill me if I say too much about giving away something. So I have to be a bit guarded, but I suggest that when you watch the documentary, you will see the amount of material that's come out, and I think you will probably want to talk to me again when I can be more freely available about what I can say.
We will do that.
Sounds good.
All righty. Gary, I appreciate it. We're going to wrap up here. And I've got to get going and get back into the real world. So we're going to wrap up real quick. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Chant. And everybody, enjoy the rest of your week. And we're going to be back, I think it's next week, with some more shows for you. And the promos and all that. The spam will be forthcoming. So have a good one, everybody. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye now.